In the year 1400, Europe is at war with the soul of Christendom itself. Two popes, one in Rome, the other in Avignon. Both claim God's throne. Their clash will fracture kingdoms, spark betrayals, and open the door to a new weapon of power and money. Amid this spiritual crisis, one Florentine banker saw not disaster, but opportunity. Giovanni de' Medici. The Medici had begun as modest money changers, but Giovanni envisioned something far greater. He understood that true wealth wasn't just measured in coins, it was measured in influence, and nothing carried more influence than the papacy. If the Medici could help raise a pope to power, they wouldn't just profit, they would become indispensable to Christendom itself. But Giovanni needed the right man for the throne. That man was Baldassare Cosa, a figure as bold as he was ruthless. Born in Naples to a minor noble family, Cosa's youth was shaped by violence and survival. He roamed the Tyrrhenian Sea as a pirate, commanding ships in treacherous waters. The cunning he sharpened at sea would later fuel his relentless rise in the church. Eventually, Cosa abandoned piracy and turned to study. At the University of Bologna, he mastered canon law, proving himself not only fierce, but clever. By 1402, his ambition had carried him into the College of Cardinals. At this time, the church was still locked in crisis. Pope Gregory XII in Rome and Pope Benedict XIII in Avignon clung stubbornly to power, neither willing to yield. For Cosa, their obstinacy was an opening. But ambition alone could not crown a pope. It required money. This was where Giovanni de' Medici stepped in. Banker and cardinal struck a secret pact. Giovanni would provide the gold, and Cosa would wield his growing influence. With Medici funds fueling his campaign, bribes were paid, alliances forged, and votes secured in the shadows of Christendom. When the conclave met in Bologna in 1410, Cosa maneuvered brilliantly. Backed at every turn by Giovanni's resources, he emerged victorious. He was crowned Pope John XXIII, the third claimant in an already fractured church.
Rather than healing the schism, his election deepened it. But for the Medici, it was a masterstroke. Giovanni de' Medici had not only elevated his ally to the papal throne, he had secured access to the Vatican's treasury, entwining the Medici name with the very heart of European power.
But the crisis of three rival popes would eventually end. The Medici's grip on the Vatican remained firm. Their alliance with John XXIII gave them unprecedented access to the church's treasury, and with it, a doorway into power that would endure for generations. For Florence, this was revolutionary. A once obscure banker had bankrolled a pope, and overnight, the Medici rose from merchants to power brokers at the heart of Christendom. By the late 1420s, Giovanni de' Medici's health declined, and with his passing in 1428, leadership of the family fell to his son Cosimo. Unlike his father, Cosimo was a man of quiet authority, educated, sharp-minded, and already connected to Florence's brightest thinkers and artists. Now, with control of the Medici Bank, his ambitions stretched far beyond Florence's walls. But power attracts enemies. By 1433, Florence itself was on edge. The Albizzi family, led by the formidable Rinaldo degli Albizzi, viewed Cosimo not as a rival, but as a threat to their dominance. Seizing his moment, Rinaldo manipulated the city's elections, stacked the councils with loyalists, and accused Cosimo of treason. Summoned under false pretenses, Cosimo was ambushed inside the Palazzo della Signoria and thrown into a dark cell high in the tower, the Alberghetto. Execution was on the table, but with Cosimo's vast connections, killing him would be dangerous. Instead, exile was chosen. Rinaldo believed Florence was finally rid of its Medici problem, but exile was no defeat. For Cosimo, it was only the beginning. From Venice, he patiently rebuilt, weaving alliances and biding his time. Meanwhile, Rinaldo's rule weakened Florence. His costly wars drained the treasury, merchants turned against him, and Florence found itself isolated. The city that cast Cosimo out was about to call him back.
After years of division, Cosimo's enemies begin to falter. His rival's authoritarian rule alienates Florence's nobles, and many start turning back to Cosimo, setting the stage for his return. By 1434, the Medici faction regained strength. As the last desperate coup collapses, Florence's leaders invite Cosimo home. He returns triumphantly, greeted by cheering crowds. Once back in Florence, Cosimo wastes no time. Though he takes no official title, behind the scenes, he controls the Republic's destiny. He consolidates power carefully, always preserving the facade of Republican government. With his influence secure, Cosimo sets out to reshape Florence. His ambitions go beyond wealth and politics. He seeks a legacy that will endure through art, intellect, and civic pride. He commissions masters like Donatello, Fra Angelico, and Michelozzo, laying the foundations for a cultural revolution. By the 1440s, Cosimo funds one of the Renaissance's most iconic works, Donatello's Bronze David. Soon after, Michelozzo designs the Palazzo Medici, a palace that embodies both grandeur and restraint. Through his patronage of art, architecture, and scholarship, Florence blossoms. By the time of his death in 1464, the city has become not just a hub of commerce, but the cultural and intellectual heart of Europe. Cosimo's place as the father of the Renaissance is secured. After his passing, leadership falls to his son, Piero de' Medici. Unlike his father, Piero is plagued by chronic illness, earning him the nickname Piero the Gouty. In 1469, at just 53, Piero succumbs to his illness, leaving Florence at a crossroads. His sons Lorenzo and Giuliano are still young, Lorenzo only 20 years old. At Piero's funeral in San Lorenzo, the family mourns, but the weight of leadership now falls squarely on Lorenzo's shoulders. Determined to preserve the Medici legacy, he steps into power, but soon faces a conspiracy unlike anything his father had endured. The Pazzi family, Florence's bitter banking rivals, joined forces with Francesco Salviati, the Archbishop of Pisa. Behind them stands Pope Sixtus IV, resentful of Lorenzo's defiance and refusing to fund papal ambitions. On April 26, 1478, during High Mass at the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, the plot unfolds. As sacred prayers echo through the vast dome, assassins strike. Giuliano de' Medici is set upon by attackers, stabbed repeatedly until he collapses on the marble floor. Meanwhile, Lorenzo is ambushed by two men with blades. Wounded, but quick, and aided by his loyal supporters, he narrowly escapes. Chaos engulfs Florence. The conspirators had planned to seize power in the confusion, but instead, the city rallies around the surviving Medici. The attack meant to destroy the dynasty only strengthens it. And from the blood-stained floor of the cathedral, Lorenzo rises, transformed into Il Magnifico.
The Archbishop Salviati and Francesco de Pazzi attempt to storm the Palazzo della Signoria, but they are captured and swiftly executed, hanged from the palace windows in a shocking public display. Rather than weakening the Medici, the failed conspiracy strengthens them. Lorenzo emerges as a symbol of Florentine resilience. The people rally behind him as the savior of the Republic, and Lorenzo moves quickly to consolidate power while still preserving the illusion of Florence's republican traditions. He establishes a council of 70 loyalists, sidelining traditional governing bodies and ensuring Medici control over all key decisions. Lorenzo proves himself a political genius. He uses taxes to reward friends and weaken rivals, while funding public projects that win the support of ordinary Florentines. With his authority secure, he turns his attention toward shaping Florence into the cultural heart of Europe. He recognizes the brilliance of a young Michelangelo Buonarroti, providing him with resources, education, and patronage that helps shape one of history's greatest artists. He encourages the genius of Leonardo da Vinci, whose insatiable curiosity leads him to sketch flying machines, dissect human anatomy, and produce works of unmatched brilliance. Lorenzo's achievements are monumental. He not only secures Medici power, but transforms Florence into the cradle of the Renaissance. Under his patronage, art, architecture, and scholarship flourish. But in 1492, Lorenzo de' Medici passes away. His son, Piero, inherits a city now fragile and exposed. Unlike his father, Piero is unprepared for the storms to come. 2 years later, King Charles VIII of France invades Italy with a modern army and crushing artillery. Piero wavers, capitulates to French demands, and surrenders Florentine territories without a fight. His cowardice enrages the people. As rebellion brews, Florence turns not to the Medici, but to a new kind of leader, a Dominican friar whose fiery sermons promise divine salvation. His name is Girolamo Savonarola. Born in Ferrara in 1452, Savonarola abandoned medicine to embrace a life of religious austerity. His visions of God's wrath are vivid and apocalyptic. Fire raining from the heavens, Florence consumed in sin, divine judgment close at hand. For a city weary of corruption, war, and vanity, his words are irresistible. Savonarola rails against the greed of bankers, the vanity of art, and the decadence of the ruling elite, none more fiercely than the Medici themselves. When Charles VIII marches into Italy, Savonarola proclaims him the scourge of God, sent to punish Florence for its sins. The city listens, and soon Florence will burn. After Piero de' Medici surrendered Florence to the French without resistance, the people turned on him. Into this vacuum stepped Savonarola, who seized the moment to establish a theocratic regime, a new Jerusalem where strict moral laws ruled daily life. But his grip on Florence was brief. The Vatican could not tolerate an independent religious authority. On May 23, 1498, Savonarola was executed in the Piazza della Signoria, hanged, burned, and his ashes scattered in the Arno to prevent his followers from venerating him. With Florence lost, the Medici family's road back to power would no longer come from the city itself, but from Rome. For the first time, a Medici would rise to the pinnacle of the church, restoring the family's prestige and opening the door for their eventual return to Florence. Piero may have triggered their downfall, but his younger brother Giovanni was about to reclaim their influence in an unexpected way. Raised in the splendor of Lorenzo the Magnificent's court, Giovanni was chosen to secure the family's future within the church. At only 13 years old, he was elevated to cardinal, a move carefully engineered by Lorenzo to bind the Medici to the Vatican's power structure. It wasn't just ambition. It was long-term strategy, generational politics few others could imagine. By 1513, at age 37, Giovanni's chance arrived. With the death of Pope Julius II, Giovanni saw his opening. Though the Medici had lost Florence, their wealth and dominance over Vatican finances endured. Giovanni purchased support, projecting himself as a safe, moderate candidate. In reality, he didn't just win the papacy, he bought it. On March 11, 1513, Giovanni de' Medici became Pope Leo X, the first Medici pope. As pope, Leo X pursued grandeur. He commissioned Raphael and Michelangelo, staged opulent banquets, and poured immense sums into rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica. But his extravagance drained the Vatican treasury. To refill it, he expanded the sale of indulgences, payments for forgiveness. What was meant to fund his projects instead fueled outrage. A German monk, Martin Luther, saw indulgences as a corruption of faith. His 95 Theses, nailed to the door of Wittenberg's church, sparked a movement that would fracture Christianity. Leo dismissed Luther as insignificant, but ignoring him proved catastrophic, igniting a schism that reshaped the church for centuries. Yet Leo remained focused on securing Medici dominance, elevating his nephew Giulio to cardinal with hopes of another Medici pope. But in December 1521, at just 46, Leo suddenly died, his lavish papacy leaving the Vatican nearly bankrupt. The reformer Adrian VI briefly succeeded him, but after Adrian's sudden death 2 years later, Giulio maneuvered his way into the papacy. In 1523, Giulio de' Medici was elected Pope Clement VII. As pope, he strengthened the family's hold further, installing his illegitimate son Alessandro as ruler of Florence. But Clement's reign unfolded in turmoil. Europe was fractured between Protestant reformers and Catholic monarchs. The Holy Roman Emperor Charles V loomed over Italy, wielding immense military and financial might. Clement first allied with Charles, then betrayed him by joining the French and other states in the League of Cognac, a disastrous gamble. In retaliation, Charles's forces stormed Rome in 1527. Poorly defended, the city fell. What followed was the infamous sack of Rome, churches looted, priceless art destroyed, thousands slaughtered. Clement barely escaped into Castel Angelo through a hidden passage. For the Medici, it was a brutal reminder that their fortunes were bound to the Vatican's fragility. Meanwhile, in Florence, Alessandro de' Medici ruled with cruelty. Paranoid and ruthless, he silenced dissent with executions and exile, earning fear but little loyalty. His personal vices deepened his unpopularity. In 1537, betrayed by his cousin Lorenzo de' Medici, Alessandro was lured into a private meeting and murdered. Florence descended into chaos. With no heir, civil war loomed. Yet from this crisis, a new figure emerged, Cosimo I de' Medici. Born in 1519 and raised far from politics, he had studied war and the classics in relative obscurity. When Alessandro was assassinated, Florence's elites, hoping for a weak figurehead, turned to the young Cosimo. But they underestimated him. Soon he would prove anything but a puppet, transforming Florence into a fortress of Medici power once more.
At just 17 years old, Cosimo de' Medici is thrust into power. Many believe he'll be nothing more than a puppet, too young and inexperienced to rule. They couldn't be more wrong. Cosimo wastes no time proving himself. He dismantles the remnants of Florence's Republican factions, silencing his enemies through exile, imprisonment, or execution. A coup attempt is crushed before it gains traction. His message is clear: challenge him and pay the price. He surrounds himself with loyal guards, reshapes the government, and places trusted allies into key positions. Florence is no longer a city of divided voices. It becomes the stage for a single ruler. Cosimo's ambition soon stretches beyond Florence. In 1555, he sets his eyes on Siena, one of the wealthiest independent city-states in Italy. With support from Spain, Cosimo lays siege. After 15 brutal months, Siena is starved into submission and falls under Medici control. This victory transforms him from a city leader into a true territorial ruler. In 1569, Pope Pius V recognizes his power by granting him the title Grand Duke of Tuscany, a rank just below that of a king. Florence is no longer merely a republic, it's now a principality ruled with absolute authority. But power never lasts forever. As Cosimo's health fails, he passes the throne to his son, Francesco I. Unlike his father, Francesco lacks discipline and vision. Corruption spreads, trade falters, and Florence begins to decline. His obsession with his mistress, Bianca Capello, over his wife, Joanna of Austria, further destabilizes the dynasty. By the time Francesco dies in 1587, Tuscany is weakened and vulnerable. The Medici name, however, is far from finished. Its next great chapter unfolds not in Italy, but in France. Catherine de' Medici, raised in the ruthless world of Italian politics, is married off at age 14 to Henry, the second son of King Francis I of France. Initially ignored and sidelined, Catherine quietly studies the French court, learning to survive and wait for her chance. That chance arrives in 1547, when Henry becomes king. Catherine, now Queen of France, remains overshadowed by his powerful mistress, but her patience pays off. In 1559, during a jousting celebration, Henry is mortally wounded. His sudden death propels Catherine into a role she had been preparing for her entire life. Her young son, Francis II, inherits the throne, but he dies within 2 years. His younger brother, Charles IX, only 10 years old, becomes king, and Catherine assumes control as regent. Suddenly, a Medici is ruling not a city, but one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. France, however, is torn apart by religious wars between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. Catherine plays both sides against each other, using diplomacy, manipulation, and ruthless strategy to maintain royal power. But in 1572, her reign takes a bloody turn. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where thousands of Protestants are slaughtered in Paris. This cements her reputation as one of the most feared queens in history. By the time of her death in 1589, Catherine had outlived 3 sons who each wore the crown. With the assassination of her last surviving son, Henry III, the Valois dynasty ends and the Bourbon line rises. Meanwhile, the Medici rulers back in Tuscany survive for another century, but their glory steadily fades. By the 18th century, with no heirs to continue the line, the dynasty dies out and Florence falls under Austrian rule. Yet the Medici legacy never truly disappears. Their patronage of artists, architects, and thinkers fueled the Renaissance and shaped European culture. They began as bankers, rose to become rulers, and left behind palaces, paintings, and ideas that still shape our world today. The Medici weren't just politicians, they were architects of power, masters of influence, and builders of modern Europe.